What if the last king of the north burned a goddess to save his people, and she came back inside him? A century of silence, a storm that never ends, and a man haunted by the heartbeat of a wolf that remembers his sins. Stay with me, because before the story ends, you'll know why some gods never die, and why love is the only thing powerful enough to bring one back. The storm over Varen's spine was not a natural one. It moved against the wind, dragging thunder like chains across the peaks, a dark and living thing that prowled through the mountain passes. The villagers who saw it swore it had eyes. The soldiers who followed it up the ridge swore it whispered names. But only one man rode into it willingly. King Cale Ardent, ruler of the northern clans, last of the blood-marked Alphas, urged his black stallion higher through the sleet. His cloak was heavy with ice, his beard crusted with frost, his mind colder than the storm itself. The night had called him north, not a messenger, not a council decree, but something older, heavier. A pull in his bones that would not be ignored. The men behind him were silent. They had learned long ago that their king spoke little and listened even less when the wind carried omens. The only sound was the crunch of hooves in snow and the low hiss of breath in the frozen air. When the pass opened into a narrow clearing, Cale reined in. The world was a blur of white and shadow, and for a moment he thought he saw movement in the snow, a flicker, a shape crawling between the drifts. He dismounted, boots sinking deep, and moved forward without waiting for his guards. "Your Majesty," one of them called. "There's nothing living up here." But Cale knew better. Something was living. He could feel it. The storm itself seemed to bend around it, curling like a beast guarding its cub. He knelt in the snow. The wind cut at his face, sharp as blades, and then he saw it, small, half buried beneath a crust of ice. A pup. Mangled, trembling, its fur ashen gray, streaked with soot and dried blood. It was barely breathing. The ribs showed through its thin body like a cage of broken fingers. Cale frowned. "A wolf," he murmured. But no, it was wrong somehow. The head too large for its body, the eyes shut tight but glowing faintly beneath the lids, as if light itself lived inside them. He reached out a gloved hand. The guard's voice came again, more urgent. "Sire, leave it. The old gods curse these peaks. That thing, it's not natural." Cale didn't move. His hand hovered an inch from the creature. The cold bit through his armor into his bones. And then the pup's eyes opened. They were not the eyes of an animal. They were silver, pure, piercing, unearthly. The kind of silver that belonged to moonlight or memory. And for a heartbeat, Cale couldn't breathe. He saw something in them, a reflection that wasn't the present. Fire. Screams. A temple burning beneath a black sky. And a woman's voice, distant but familiar, crying out his name. Cale staggered back. His pulse thundered in his ears. The guard started toward him, but Cale raised a hand to stop him. "Stay back," he ordered, though his voice came out softer than he intended. The pup had not moved. It simply watched him. Then, in the silence between thunderclaps, a whisper cut through the wind. Faint, soft, but unmistakable. "You found me again." Cale froze. The words hadn't come from the men behind him. They hadn't come from his own mouth. They had come from inside his mind, gentle, echoing, like a memory resurfacing from a long, dark sleep. He stared at the creature, his heartbeat slowing, every instinct warring with reason. Wolves didn't speak. The dead didn't return. And yet something in those eyes, that voice, broke through the iron walls he'd spent a decade building. He reached forward again, this time with bare hands. The cold bit deep, but he ignored it. When he touched the pup, its trembling stopped. The storm eased, as if the wind itself had taken a breath. And then, in a motion so human it startled him, the creature leaned its head against his palm. Cale exhaled, a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He wrapped his cloak around the pup and rose to his feet. "Bring the horses," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. One of the guards hesitated. "My king, what do you intend?" Kale looked toward the horizon where lightning split the mountains open like veins of light. I intend, he said quietly, to know why something that should have died remembers my name. He mounted, holding the pup close against his chest. Its warmth pulsed faintly, steady, almost human. The storm began to fade behind him as they rode, though the thunder never fully stopped. It followed them, distant but constant, a reminder that the past was never buried, only waiting to be found again. The citadel of Highmark stood like a wound against the horizon, all black stone and jagged towers, built to withstand gods as much as men. For 10 years, it had been Kale Arden's fortress, his cage, and his throne. From its ramparts, he ruled over 5 clans and an empire that stretched from the ice fields to the Iron Coast. But even kings could not command peace within themselves. When Kale returned through the northern gates that night, the guards fell silent. The torches flickered as if shrinking from the storm that followed him in. Wrapped in his cloak, he carried the pup against his chest, its small head resting in the crook of his arm. It slept now, but not naturally. It was the stillness of something between life and death. The servants whispered as he passed through the hall. He brings home a beast. It's a curse, surely. Didn't he bury his last companion in the snow? Rumors clung to him like frost, but Kale had stopped caring long ago. He crossed the length of the great hall without looking at anyone and went straight to the hearth in his private chambers. The fire had been left burning low. He stoked it with one hand while the other held the bundle close. When he laid the pup down by the flames, its fur glistened in the light. The gray coat shimmered faintly, a hint of silver underneath, as though the creature had been carved from moonlight itself. Kale knelt beside it, resting one arm on his knee. He wasn't sure what he expected. Perhaps for it to vanish in smoke and shadow, to prove him mad for bringing home a whisper and a ghost. Instead, it sighed, a long, tired sound, and stretched its paws toward the heat. Kale stayed there until dawn. He hadn't watched anything sleep in years. He had forgotten what quiet looked like. When morning came, the council demanded answers. The great hall filled with the weight of disapproval. 12 men in wolf fur cloaks, each representing one of the clans sworn to his crown, stood before him. Their voices were iron and accusation. "Your Majesty," said Lord Bren, the eldest, "our enemies see omens in your silence. You bring home a wild thing from cursed lands. The people are afraid." Kale, seated upon the throne of black oak, stared down at the council without speaking. He was not a man made for debate. He ruled through presence, through the quiet that made others speak too much. Lord Bren continued, emboldened by the silence. "They say the creature howls at night, that it's marked by the old gods. If such superstition festers in the court, it will turn to rebellion before spring." Kale's gaze flickered. "And would you have me kill a starving pup to quiet gossip?" The Lord hesitated. "If that's what the realm requires." Kale rose then, slowly, and the chamber seemed to shrink around him. He wasn't a large man, but he carried himself like one who bore a crown made of stone. "The realm requires a spine," he said coldly, "not fear." The council bowed low, their eyes cast down. But as Kale turned to leave, one of the younger lords, a proud voice not yet tempered by wisdom, spoke out. "It said the beast carries memory in its blood, that it remembers what men have forgotten. Perhaps that's what frightens us most." Kale paused at the door. He did not look back. "Then perhaps," he said quietly, "we should ask ourselves why." The days passed, and the pup, whom he named Ashen, for the color of its fur, began to change. It healed quickly, unnaturally so. The scars faded, the eyes grew brighter, and sometimes when Kale entered the room, the creature would look up as though it already knew he was coming. He trained it out of habit, at first. The way a soldier sharpens a blade he doesn't yet intend to use. But Ashen learned fast, faster than any hound or wolf Kale had seen. It understood tone, gesture, silence. It followed him without leash or command. At night, Kale began to dream again. He saw flashes, a temple burning beneath silver light, a woman's voice crying out, the scent of lilac and smoke. Always the same word echoed before he woke. Remember. Each morning, he'd find Ashen sitting by the bed, watching him with those silver eyes unblinking, as if it knew exactly what he had seen. Once he spoke to it. "What are you?" he asked softly. "A curse? A ghost? Or something sent to punish me?" The wolf tilted its head, then rested it against his knee. Its heartbeat was slow and steady. Kale almost smiled. "Very well," he whispered. "Stay, then, until the gods come to claim you." Outside, snow fell like ash. The northern wind moaned through the battlements. But within the firelight, man and beast sat together, two remnants of something broken, bound by a silence they both seemed to understand. By the seventh moon, the whispers had spread far beyond the walls of Highmark. They said the king had gone mad again, that the northern cold had finally taken his reason. They said the creature he kept was no wolf at all, but a vessel of the forgotten gods, a shadow that fed on his guilt. Some swore that on storm nights, its howl rose higher than the wind, and that it spoke his name between breaths. Kale heard the rumors. He always did. But he answered none of them. Let them talk. Let them weave stories in dark corners of taverns and council halls. Words were harmless compared to the silence that haunted him each night. He had not slept properly in weeks. Each time he closed his eyes, he dreamt of fire. Of the siege of Elwith, 10 years gone, when the world had burned at his command. He saw the temple again, the one they told him was empty before he gave the order to torch it. He saw the light spilling out as the doors burst open, the figure of a woman within, her hair white as snow, her hands outstretched, her mouth shaping words he could never quite remember. And somewhere behind her, a great wolf of silver flame, howling until the sky itself seemed to split. He would wake gasping, the scent of smoke still in his lungs, his sheets cold with sweat. And every time, Ashen would be there, lying quietly near the fire, its silver eyes reflecting the same flames he'd just escaped. Sometimes, Kale would swear the wolf was the one dreaming, and he was merely the shadow caught inside it. The court grew restless. His council returned, this time not with questions, but with demands. They gathered in the war room, their faces drawn tight with fear disguised as logic. Maps covered the table, but no one looked at them. Lord Bren spoke first, voice trembling with a strain of caution. "Your Majesty, I speak only as one who has served you faithfully for 2 decades. The clans are unsettled. The people whisper of omens. They say the storms follow you wherever you ride." Kale leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the carved wolf's head at its armrest. "Do you believe that?" "I believe," Bren said carefully, "that the old gods have long memories, and that some things are better left buried." Kale's gaze darkened. "And if I tell you it was not I who dug them up? Then it was your mercy that brought the grave into your hall," another lord interjected. "You should have left the beast in the snow." The room went still. Kale rose slowly, the chair creaking under his weight. "If that's your counsel, my lords, then I should have left all of you there, too." No one spoke after that. He left the chamber without looking back, his cloak trailing behind him like spilled ink. The heavy doors shut with a sound that silenced every murmur in the hall beyond. That night, Kale found Ashen standing by the open window of his chamber. The wind blew in from the north, thick with snow and the scent of iron. The wolf's fur rippled as though catching invisible flames, each strand shining faintly in the moonlight. Kale approached quietly. "You hear them, don't you?" he said. "Their fear, their hatred, their prayers that I will fall." Ashen turned its head, and for a moment, Kale could have sworn there was understanding in its gaze, the weary, ancient understanding of something that had seen too much. He knelt beside it. "They think I've lost my mind," he murmured. "Perhaps I have. I burned their gods to save them from each other, and still they curse my name. What would you have me do, creature?" The wolf moved closer, pressing its forehead against his chest. Its breath was cold and soft. Kale froze because in that stillness, in that quiet, he heard it again. "Remember, The words slid through his thoughts like a whisper across glass. His eyes shut before he could stop himself. And suddenly, he wasn't in his chamber anymore. He stood in that same temple from his dreams, though now it was whole. The air was warm, thick with incense and light. The white-haired woman stood before him, alive and radiant, her eyes filled with the same silver glow as Ashen's. "You cannot run from what you owe," she said. "You made a promise. You broke it." Kale reached out to her, but when his fingers brushed hers, she vanished into smoke. He gasped awake, falling to one knee beside the wolf. Ashen was staring at him, unblinking, its breath steady. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Kale pressed a hand against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath his ribs. "Who are you?" he whispered. "What are you showing me?" The wolf did not answer, not in words. But when it turned its gaze toward the flames, Kale saw it again. That same image from his dream, flickering inside the fire. The woman, the temple, the moon above them both. For the first time in years, Kale felt something like fear. The next morning, he ordered the citadel gates sealed. No one in, no one out. Highmark would stand alone until he found the truth buried in those silver eyes, even if it cost him his sanity. Outside, the wind howled through the valley like a living thing. Inside, the King of the North stared into the embers and thought he heard them whisper his name. Not as a curse, as a memory trying to return. Winter did not arrive that year. It descended like a siege. The northern winds turned to blades, the rivers froze solid by mid-autumn, and the forests fell silent, as if holding their breath. Every omen the priests had whispered of came true in half the time they feared. And through it all, Kale Arden ruled from a fortress that had begun to feel less like a kingdom and more like a tomb. The fire in the great hall burned day and night, yet still the cold seeped in. The guards wore fur over their armor, and still their fingers turned blue. The cooks prayed before lighting their stoves. And every night, when the moon was full, the beast in the king's chambers raised its head and howled, low, mournful, and strange. It was not the cry of an animal. It was the voice of something remembering what it once had been. The priests of Highmark had warned Kale. They came in secret, cloaked and trembling, bearing old scrolls they swore were forbidden even to speak aloud. "My king," said the eldest, her face more shadow than flesh beneath the hood, "that creature you shelter carries an echo of the divine. There are runes in the temple ruins, markings that tell of the vow of the moon. The goddess of memory bound herself once to mortal form to protect the balance between men and gods. When that vessel is destroyed," she hesitated. "When it is destroyed, the divine must find another body to survive, even the body of a beast." Kale said nothing for a long time. The wind rattled the windows. Finally, he rose from his throne and walked toward the fire. "You say this wolf carries a god," he said quietly. "Then tell me why it calls my name when I sleep." The priest lowered her head. "Perhaps, my king, it remembers who burned its temple." That night, Kale could not stay still. He wandered the corridors until dawn, his boots echoing through halls of stone. The memories pressed in like ghosts. He had convinced himself that burning Elwith was mercy, a sacrifice to end the endless war of gods and men. But what if it hadn't ended anything? What if it had only torn the veil between them? He found Ashen waiting by the window again, for shimmering in the faint pre-dawn light. The wolf turned its head as he approached, eyes catching the color of molten silver. "You're not just a beast," Kale said. "You're what's left of her, aren't you?" The wolf's gaze deepened. Something vast and ancient stirred behind those eyes. The room seemed to breathe. And then he heard the voice again. Not as a whisper this time, but as something closer to speech, clear, quiet, sorrowful. "You should not have remembered me." Kale's breath caught. "Then why do you keep showing me?" "Because you asked for forgiveness and never earned it." He staggered back. The wolf rose to its feet, slow and deliberate, as if shedding the stiffness of an age. For a heartbeat, Kale saw light ripple across its fur, not fire, but memory given form. The figure of the woman from his dreams flickered behind it like a reflection caught in water. Kale fell to one knee. If I could undo it. You cannot. The voice was no longer in his mind alone. It filled the chamber, as though the stones themselves remembered her. But you can end what you began. The following morning, Kale summoned his generals. He ordered the northern banners raised, the legions gathered, the watchfires lit along every ridge. They did not understand. There was no war declared, no invasion on the horizon, and yet the king moved as though the enemy already stood at his gates. "To whom do we march, sire?" asked his captain. "To the truth," Kale replied, "and whatever waits beneath the ruins of Elwith." They tried to stop him. The council begged, the priests wept, the people whispered that the king had lost his soul. But Kale rode out before sunrise, Ashen at his side, its paws silent on the snow. Behind him, Highmark's gates closed like the lid of a coffin. As they crossed the frozen valley, Kale looked toward the east, where the first light of morning touched the mountains. He had spent a decade denying ghosts, burying them beneath crowns and duty. Now he rode toward them willingly. The wind carried the faint sound of a wolf's howl, or perhaps it was a woman's cry. The two were one and the same. And for the first time in years, Kale no longer felt like a king. He felt like a man who had finally decided to remember. The ruins of Elwith rose from the frost like the ribs of some buried titan. Once a temple city, it had been the heart of the northern faith, marble towers carved with moon sigils, obsidian altars where the priests of the goddess kept the stories of men and gods alike. Kale remembered it only in flame, in the roar of collapse and the screams of the dying. Now it stood silent, blanketed by snow, every archway a scar. He dismounted at the gates, the same gates he had watched burn 10 years ago. His soldiers hung back, murmuring prayers. Even Ashen stopped short, head low, tail stiff, as though the ground itself warned them away. Kale stepped forward alone. The cold was absolute. It pressed into his bones until even his breath came out as glass. Each step through the ruins felt like walking through a dream he'd already had. The air carried a faint scent of ash that shouldn't still exist after a decade of snow. He reached what had once been the central hall, a wide space open to the sky, where shattered columns jutted like teeth. The altar still stood, blackened and cracked. Symbols once sacred were now barely visible beneath soot and ice. Kale touched the surface. The stone was warm. Ashen's low growl rolled through the silence behind him. The wolf approached cautiously, eyes glowing brighter with each step. Kale turned, heart hammering. "Show me," he said, not as a command, but as a plea. The wind rose. Snow swirled upward, forming spirals of light and shadow. The ruins shimmered, and suddenly, he wasn't standing in the broken hall anymore. The walls around him were whole again. The torches burned with silver flame. The air hummed with chanting. And at the altar stood her, the woman from his dreams. Her white hair spilled over her shoulders, her robes gleaming like starlight. She was no ghost. She was alive in this memory. "You came back," she said softly. "Do you even remember my name?" Kale's throat closed. He couldn't speak. He had seen her face only for an instant, years ago, through smoke and flame, and yet that instant had haunted him every night since. "You were the oracle," he managed. "The one I burned," she finished for him. Her tone was neither cruel nor forgiving, only tired. "You said it was mercy, to end a war the gods themselves began." Kale clenched his fists. "I believed it was right, that if I destroyed this place, the people would be free." "Free?" She stepped closer, the echo of her footsteps rippling through the illusion. "You tore the bridge between heaven and earth, Kale Ardent. You severed memory from meaning. And now your world forgets itself, its seasons, its balance, its mercy. Do you not see the cost?" The storm above them deepened. The silver torches flickered into blue flame. Ashen paced in a circle around them, its body half light, half shadow. "Why am I the one who remembers?" Kale whispered. The oracle looked down at the wolf. "Because you asked to bear the sin yourself. And I granted it." The realization struck like a blade to the chest. He remembered kneeling before the temple as the fires consumed it. He had heard her voice over the roar, not in hatred, but pity. She had given him what he begged for, to carry the guilt alone. The goddess had bound his soul to the memory of what he destroyed. And when her mortal vessel perished, part of her had taken root in him, and the rest had fled into the body of the beast now standing before him. Ashen lifted its head. Its eyes gleamed silver-white, reflecting both Kale and the oracle at once. "You made us one," the voice said, her voice, layered with a growl beneath it. "You and I, mortal and divine, bound by fire and memory." Kale fell to his knees. "Then release me," he said. "Let me end it." "End it," she echoed. "There is no ending. There is only remembrance. The old gods will rise again, because men keep killing them and then praying for their return." The light flared. The ruins shifted back to what they were, cold, broken, and silent. The vision faded, leaving Kale kneeling before the shattered altar, snow piling on his shoulders. Ashen stood beside him, no longer glowing, its fur dull and heavy with frost. He reached out, laying a hand on its head. The wolf didn't flinch this time. "If you are her," he murmured, "then I was never her enemy." The wolf's eyes met his. "No," came the faint reply inside his mind. "You were her mistake." When Kale rode back to camp, dawn had turned the mountains pale gold. His men looked at him as though he had aged 10 years overnight. They didn't ask what he'd seen. He didn't tell them. He only said one thing before mounting again and turning northward. "The gods are not dead," he said. "They're waking, and we are their dream." Then he spurred his horse onward, Ashen running at his side, snow rising like smoke behind them. The ride north felt endless. The land itself seemed to resist them now, snowdrifts swallowing the roads, trees creaking under the weight of ice that never melted. Kale's soldiers rode in silence, their eyes fixed on the horizon, as though afraid that speaking would summon something from the mist. Ashen kept pace with Kale's horse, silent and tireless. Its silver coat had dulled to pewter in the dim light, but the eyes were the same, those impossible eyes that caught every flicker of thought in his mind. When they stopped to make camp, the wolf would sit just outside the circle of firelight, staring into the dark as if listening to voices only it could hear. Kale barely slept. He would lie awake, watching the glow of the coals fade to ash, listening to the slow rhythm of the creature's breathing. The quiet between them had become something alive, something that pressed against him more than any sound ever could. He had begun to understand what the oracle meant. The world was forgetting itself. Storms came in seasons that shouldn't exist. Rivers ran backward for a day and then righted themselves. Birds fell silent for weeks. The people called it the long winter, but Kale knew better. It was not the cold that was spreading. It was memory unraveling. And somehow he was its tether. By the time they reached the Iron Flats, only a dozen of his men remained. The others had turned back, frightened or frostbitten or simply unwilling to follow a king who no longer spoke of war or victory, but of atonement. The plains were a white emptiness, stretching to the edge of sight. At their center rose a single stone tower, ancient, narrow, a remnant from before the first kings. Kale dismounted and stood before it, the wind tugging at his cloak. He felt the pull again, that same deep current in his blood that had led him north the first time. Ashen padded forward, sniffed the frozen air, and then began to climb the steps. The wolf did not look back. Kale followed. Inside, the tower was hollow and vast, its spiral staircase lit by a faint, steady light that came from nowhere he could name. The air was warmer here, filled with the scent of smoke and lilac, the same scent that haunted his dreams. He ascended until the steps ended in a wide chamber open to the sky. Snow fell through the gap above, melting before it touched the floor. And there, at the center of the chamber, stood a mirror. It was not glass. It was water, motionless and dark, as if the surface itself refused to reflect the world around it. Ashen stopped at its edge. The wolf stared into the water and growled softly, low and uncertain. Kale stepped forward. His reflection wavered. Then it changed. He saw himself as he had been a decade ago, the conqueror, the Alpha King. Younger, harder, burning with belief that war could cleanse the world. Behind that reflection stood the Oracle, her eyes calm, her hands resting on his shoulders. He heard her voice again. "You took what was mine. Now you must give it back." He reached toward the mirror. His reflection did the same. When his fingertips brushed the surface, it rippled. Then the water climbed his arm like living smoke. Kale gasped, but did not pull away. The liquid light spread across his chest, up his throat, into his eyes. Images poured through him. The burning temple, the howl of the silver wolf, the first snow of the long winter. Each one seared into his mind, and then vanished. Ashen began to howl, not in pain, but in harmony. The sound filled the tower, shaking the stones. Kale fell to his knees, clutching his chest as a new rhythm took hold of his heart, a second heartbeat not his own. When the light faded, the mirror was gone. The water had vanished, and only a faint silver line remained etched across the stone where it had stood. Ashen lay on the floor beside him, breathing shallowly. Its fur shimmered faintly, like a dying ember. Kale reached out, running his hand down the creature's neck. "What did you do?" he whispered. The wolf opened its eyes. Brighter now, too bright to look at directly. "What you would not," came the voice inside him. "You remember now. The rest is yours to bear." Then its gaze dimmed. Its breathing slowed. Kale's vision blurred. He tried to speak, to command, to beg, but the wolf's body had already begun to fade, unraveling into the same silver mist that had once been the mirror. When it was gone, only a faint warmth lingered where its heart had been. Kale sat back on his heels, eyes fixed on the empty space before him. For the first time in years, he felt alone. But beneath that loneliness was something else, something stirring. The second heartbeat remained. He rose slowly. Snow drifted through the broken roof, melting against his face. When he looked up, the clouds above were splitting, and a pale crescent moon hung in the dawn light. "Then so be it," he murmured. "If I cannot bury the gods, I will remember them instead." His voice echoed through the hollow tower, carried out across the frozen plains. The wolf's howl was gone now, but the sound of it lived on inside him, low and steady, as constant as the wind. For 3 days after the tower, Kale wandered the plains alone. His men were gone, some scattered, some dead, some too afraid to follow a man who no longer looked entirely human. His eyes, once dark as iron, now carried a sheen of silver. In the reflection of his sword, he could see the faint shimmer of light pulsing in his veins. The wolf was gone, yet not gone. Every heartbeat felt doubled, as if another rhythm moved beneath his own. He did not sleep. When he closed his eyes, he saw through the eyes of the beast, snow stretching for miles, rivers frozen solid, trees heavy with frost. Somewhere far away, he felt the faint stir of other hearts, beating in answer. The old gods were waking, just as the oracle had warned. Kale kept walking north. There was no road now, no path, but instinct. The wind rose, bringing with it the scent of iron and smoke. And far ahead, against the white horizon, he saw shapes moving, dark banners, a line of torches, the glint of armor.
An army.
The southern banners. He recognized them even at a distance, the crest of the hawk, the same sigil that had flown over the armies that once burned his lands. He thought they'd died out, scattered into the southern wastes. But now they marched again, this time carrying relics, not swords. Their priests chanted as they walked, their voices rising above the howl of the wind. Kale's first instinct was to turn away. He was no longer a king, and these were no longer his wars. But the heartbeat inside him quickened, and his breath came out as mist edged with light. They were heading toward the tower. He turned back. By the time Kale reached them, night had fallen. He moved through the blizzard like a shadow, cloak drawn tight, sword sheathed at his back. He approached the edge of their camp unseen, listening to the chanting rise and fall. In the center of their circle burned a single silver flame, the same light that had poured through the tower mirror. Around it stood a dozen priests, hands raised, their mouths shaping ancient words. O memory, break the chains of flesh. O fire, reclaim your vessel. Kale's blood froze. They weren't praying to the goddess. They were trying to summon her, drag her back into the world she'd left behind. The same power that had nearly destroyed it once before. He stepped into the firelight. The chanting stopped. Who dares? One of the priests began, but the words died in his throat. Recognition flared across their faces. The Alpha King, someone whispered. The Oathbreaker. Kale said nothing. He drew his sword. The steel shimmered silver, not from reflection, but from the pulse that ran through it. His pulse, the second heartbeat. You do not understand what you call, he said. She cannot return through you. And you think she lives in you instead? Sneered the high priest. You think the gods choose murderers as vessels? Kale stepped forward. They choose those who remember. He drove the blade into the ground between them. Light burst from the wound in the earth, blinding and cold. The priests screamed, clutching their faces, but Kale stood unmoving. The silver flame bent toward him, drawn as if to breath. He felt it fill his lungs, his veins, his mind. For a moment he saw everything, the temple burning, the wolf's eyes closing, the tower mirror shattering. The goddess's voice rose with the wind. You're both prison and gate. Choose. Kale closed his eyes. Then let me be both. The light consumed the camp. When dawn came, only Kale stood among the ashes. The banners lay tattered, the snow melted to black mud. His sword was gone, melted down to hilt and memory. The silver light still burned faintly beneath his skin, pulsing with each breath. He looked north, toward the frozen horizon. The wind had changed. It no longer smelled of death, but of rain. Somewhere beyond the plains, spring was beginning. He knew what that meant. The long winter was ending, but not because the gods were gone. It was ending because one of them walked the earth again, carried inside the body of a man who once thought himself above them. Kale wrapped his cloak tighter and began to walk. Each step left a faint trace of silver in the snow that vanished a moment later. He did not look back. When Kale returned to Highmark, spring had reached the valley. Not the gentle thaw of old songs, but a violent one. Snow breaking open in floods, mountains splitting under the rush of meltwater, the earth itself groaning as if something ancient stirred beneath it. The people called it a miracle. The priests called it a reckoning. The king called it a memory returning to life. He rode through the lower gates alone.
No escort. No banners.
The guards who saw him bowed but did not speak. Some crossed themselves. His name had already become legend. A king gone mad, a man who'd walked into a storm and come back with eyes of silver. The corridors of the citadel seemed narrower now, as though the walls themselves remembered what they once were. The air was warm, the fires high, but Kale felt a colder weight pressing against him, the stares of those who had once served him. Lords, priests, soldiers, all waiting to see what he had become. He entered the throne hall. The council was already there. 12 men in wolf fur cloaks, the same as before, but smaller now somehow. Weaker. Their whispers stopped the moment he crossed the threshold. My king, Lord Bren said cautiously, you've returned. Kale took off his gloves, placed them on the table beside him. His hands were steady, though the faint silver shimmer beneath his skin caught the firelight. I have, he said, and so has something else. The lords exchanged uneasy glances. You speak in riddles, Majesty, said Bren. We heard you went north seeking forgiveness. Did you find it? Kale looked past him, toward the tall windows overlooking the valley. From here, he could see the rivers breaking through the ice, the first signs of green on the slopes. Forgiveness. He almost smiled.
No.
But I found truth. And truth does not forgive. Lord Bren's voice hardened. Then speak it plain. What truth? Kale turned back to them. That the gods never left. They linger in us, in our cruelty, our pride, our endless hunger to be more than what we are. I killed one once, or thought I did. But you cannot kill memory. It waits. It finds new shape. His words hung in the hall like frost. One of the younger lords spat. Blasphemy. You bring heresy into this chamber? Kale stepped closer. The young man recoiled as the silver glint in Kale's eyes caught his own reflection. Blasphemy.
Kale said softly. No.
I bring witness. The torches along the walls flared, flames turning pale as moonlight. The council gasped. In their faces he saw terror, but also something else. Recognition. They had felt it too, then. The stirring in the world. The gods beneath their skin. Kale sat upon the throne, though it no longer felt like his. The wolf head carvings on its arms seemed to breathe faintly under his fingers. Listen to me, he said, voice low but carrying. The long winter is over, but the balance has not returned. The goddess of memory walks again, not as spirit, not as beast, but through me. And because of that, you must choose. Bren swallowed. Choose. Between forgetting and remembering, Kale said. Between the comfort of blindness and the pain of seeing what we truly are. The world will change either way. But if you pretend this never happened, if you cling to your crowns and your gold, then when the next god wakes, you will not survive it. The younger lord found his courage again. You threaten your own counsel? Kale rose. The light around him seemed to breathe, soft and cold, throwing his shadow high across the walls. I offer you what I was never offered, a choice. The room fell silent. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Rain struck the windows, heavy and sudden, the first real rain in 10 years. It washed the dust from the stones and drowned out the whispers of fear. Kale walked down from the dais, past the frozen faces of his council. He paused by the doors. I am not your king anymore, he said quietly. I am your memory, and memory does not kneel. He pushed open the doors and stepped into the rain. He stood in the courtyard until his cloak clung heavy to his shoulders. The city below had come alive, the sound of water rushing through the streets, children laughing as the thaw reached their doorsteps. For the first time since the fire at Elwith, the sky held color again. Kale tilted his head back, eyes closed. The rain on his face felt like forgiveness, but he knew better. It was something older, deeper, a world remembering itself. When he opened his eyes, the silver glow was faint but steady. A voice murmured in the back of his mind, neither woman nor wolf now, but something vast and quiet. You kept your promise. He nodded once. No, he said softly. I'm just beginning to. The rain did not stop for 7 days. It rolled down the mountains in silver sheets, turned fields to mirrors, filled rivers until they swallowed bridges. Crops drowned and then sprouted anew, faster than they should have. Livestock gave birth out of season. Birds returned from migrations that had never begun. The priests called it a cleansing. The farmers called it a curse. Kale knew it for what it was, the remembering of the world. Every living thing carried the echo of what it once had been. And now, as the flood washed over the land, those echoes were stirring. From Highmark, Kale watched the valley shimmer beneath the rain. The scent of wet stone filled the air. He no longer wore the crown. It sat untouched on the war table, dulled by moisture, a useless thing now. He had stopped giving orders. His soldiers no longer asked for them. Instead, they watched him, and they felt. The old instinct to obey had been replaced by something quieter, heavier, a recognition that the man they followed was not simply a king anymore. Messengers arrived daily, soaked to the bone, bearing stories that sounded more like omens than reports. A child born with eyes like molten silver. A forest that bloomed overnight. A river that sang. A mountain that cracked open to reveal a city carved in stone older than time. Every tale carried the same undercurrent. The world was remembering itself. And memory, Kale knew, was not gentle. The council had dissolved after his return. Some fled south. Others locked themselves in their estates. Lord Bren remained, too old to run and too proud to hide. He found Kale in the old war chamber, standing before the great map of the northern realms. The parchment had warped from damp, rivers bleeding into coastlines. They won't hold together, Bren said quietly. The clans, the cities, the law itself. People are turning to the old gods. They say you've brought them back. Kale's gaze remained fixed on the map. I didn't bring them back, he said. They were always here. We just stopped listening. And now? Bren asked. Now that we've heard them again? Kale turned, and the flicker of light beneath his skin caught the old lord's breath. Now we live with what we've done. He crossed to the window. Below, he could see the people gathering in the rain, hundreds of them, faces upturned, waiting for something. Not judgment, not command, simply truth. Kale descended the steps and stepped out into the storm. The crowd parted as he walked among them. Men, women, children, all silent, all watching. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, ran down his face in cold rivulets, but he felt nothing but the pulse in his chest. 2 heartbeats, one his own, one older than the world. He raised his hand. Lightning flashed somewhere far above. You feel it, he said, his voice low but clear. The world stirring beneath your feet. The air breathing again. You think this is magic or punishment, but it's neither. It's memory. The people murmured, uncertain. The gods are not returning, he said. They never left. They were the wind you forgot to name, the river you stopped thinking, the blood in your own veins. You called them myths because it was easier than admitting you had become them. He paused. Faces glistened through the rain, expectant, fearful. We built our crowns on forgetting. We ruled by pretending that power was ours alone. But we were wrong. The gods do not ask for temples. They ask for remembrance. They live where we carry them. In every kindness, in every cruelty, in every choice that outlives us. His voice broke then softer. I burned a goddess once. I thought I could free men by killing what bound them. Instead, I bound her inside me. And now I carry her weight, so you won't have to. He looked out over the crowd. You owe the gods nothing. Not prayer, not fear. Only truth. Remember that, and you will never need another king. He turned and began to walk away, the people parting again as he passed. No one called out. No one followed. The silence that trailed him was not disbelief. It was reverence, and something stranger. Understanding. By nightfall, the rain had stopped. The air was clean, the sky vast and full of unfamiliar stars. Kale stood at the edge of the parapet, looking toward the horizon where the mountains cut sharp against the moonlight. The second heartbeat within him had grown faint, as though the goddess's presence was slowly receding. He could feel her still, like a tide pulling back, leaving behind the calm after a storm. You have done what I could not, the voice murmured. You made them remember. He closed his eyes. And now you must forget. The words faded with the wind. For a moment, Kale thought he might. He felt the weight lifting, the divine presence unspooling from his blood. His vision blurred, his breath came shallow. He smiled faintly. Good, he whispered. Let the world keep its memory. I've done my part. Then he let go. When dawn came, the people found the throne room empty.
No crown. No sword.
No body. Only a trail of faint silver footprints leading to the open gates, and beyond them, the bright, clean silence of a world reborn. Years passed. The world reshaped itself quietly, as if careful not to disturb the memory of what had come before. The long winter was spoken of only in fragments, half-remembered stories told by firelight, warnings whispered to children about the days when the sky froze and kings forgot their souls. No one knew what had become of Kale Ardent, last of the northern alphas. Some said he walked into the mountains and became the wind itself. Others swore that, on clear nights, they'd seen a man with silver eyes standing beside a great wolf on the cliffs above the valley. But most believed he had simply faded, his duty done, his name carried away by the rivers he'd freed. The realm of Highmark changed. Without Kale's crown, there was no single throne. The lords who once fought for power instead began to tend the land itself. The floods left the soil dark and rich. Crops grew faster than they ever had. The people built gardens where there had been barracks. The sound of prayer returned, not to kings or armies, but to the sky, to the earth, to the quiet between breaths. The priests of the New Age said that the gods had not been reborn, they had been remembered. In the heart of the rebuilt city stood a monument, a circle of black stone engraved with no name. In the center of it, water rose from the ground, perfectly still, forming a mirror that never rippled, not even in the wind. Travelers would come from across the continent to look into that surface. Some claimed they saw their own reflections. Others saw someone they'd lost. A few swore that, for a heartbeat, they saw a pair of eyes watching back, cold, silver, patient. Children would toss flowers into the mirror and listen to the faint hum that rose when the petals touched the water. The old folks said that was the sound of the world remembering itself. One spring morning, a shepherd boy climbed the ridge above the valley, chasing a lamb that had strayed too far. At the summit he froze. There, standing against the dawn, was a wolf, coat the color of moonlit ash, eyes calm and bright. It looked at the boy, head tilted, then turned toward the mountains. And beside it, just for a moment, the boy thought he saw a man. Cloaked, tall, his hair streaked with silver, his hand resting lightly on the creature's neck. Neither spoke. The wolf let out a single soft sound, not a growl, not a howl, but something in between, something that felt like farewell. Then they vanished into the mist. When the boy returned to the village, he told the others. No one laughed. No one doubted. Because every year, when the snows melted and the first rains came, the valley would fill with that same silver light, the one that shimmered in the puddles and the rivers, as if the world itself had opened its eyes for a moment to remember. And so the story of Cale Ardent became what all truths must, a legend. A king who tried to burn the divine, and instead became its vessel. A man who carried memory through the storm and gave it back to a world that had forgotten itself. He left behind no heir, no crown, no army, only a whisper that passed down through generations. The gods are what we remember. The monsters are what we forget. And when the wind rose through the valley, threading through the trees and the stones, it sometimes carried a low sound with it, half a growl, half a sigh. The people said it was the wolf. The old ones said it was the king. But those who listened closely swore it was both, breathing as one. Because in the end, there was never a difference. Centuries passed. The world changed again. Kingdoms rose, fell, and rose anew, each believing itself the first. The language of Cale Ardent's time eroded into dust, and his name became a myth recited in temples that forgot whom they worshipped. But the rain remained. Every few years, without warning, a silver rain would fall across the northern valleys. It did not soak the soil or chill the flesh. It glowed faintly against the night, and wherever it touched, things remembered what they were meant to be. Trees straightened, rivers cleared, old wounds faded. For a day or two, the world felt awake. Then it would fade again, leaving only the faint scent of lilac and ash. Scholars argued over its meaning. Some said it was just light refracted through minerals in the air. Others whispered that it was the soul of a forgotten god stretching across the world to see what had become of it. The farmers didn't argue. When the rain came, they set down their tools, took off their hats, and stood in silence. They said it was the king's blessing, a promise that the earth would never forget them as long as they remembered where they came from. Far north, beyond the valleys and past the spine of Varan, the mountains remained. Few dared climb that high, for the wind there spoke too clearly. But one explorer, a young woman from the coast, reached the summit one spring evening. She found nothing but stone and snow, until she noticed a single paw print, half filled with frost, shining faintly under the moonlight. Next to it, a footprint, human,
Deep. Old.
and at the edge of the cliff, she saw it, a figure in the distance, facing east where dawn was beginning to rise. The figure did not move, did not fade. The light struck him, and for an instant the world shimmered, silver, endless, familiar. She blinked, and he was gone. She descended without fear. She carried no relic, no proof. Only a calm she could not explain. When she reached the lowlands again, she wrote a single line in her journal before sealing it away. I have seen the one who remembers. And, because of him, so do we. And so the tale endured, not in books or crowns, but in rain, in stone, in blood that still carried a faint glint of silver when the moon was full. They no longer said his name, but when the world turned quiet before storm, or when a wolf's call echoed through the forests at twilight, those who still believed would whisper to the wind, "Thank you, Kale. We remember." And sometimes, if the night was calm enough, the wind would whisper back. And that is the story of Kale Ardent, the king who tried to burn a god and became one instead. A tale of memory, of guilt, and of love that outlived death itself. Some legends end in crowns and blood. This one ends in rain, a world remembering the man who refused to forget. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, that quiet ache between loss and wonder, then you belong here. Subscribe for more dark fantasy love stories, tales of broken gods, haunted kings, and the kind of devotion that survives even the end of the world. Because here, every story remembers you, too.